Here's something that will mess with your head. Malaysia has some of the cheapest fuel prices on the planet. A liter of petrol costs less than a bottle of water in most Western countries. Housing is affordable. Food is ridiculously cheap. Healthcare is subsidized. Internet is fast and getting faster. On paper, Malaysia looks like an absolute steal. So why are Malaysians still struggling to afford a decent life? And why are some of the world's smartest investors quietly walking away? Something doesn't add up. And when you dig into it, really dig, what you find will completely change how you think about cheap. Malaysia sits at one of the most strategically valuable points on Earth, right next to the Strait of Malacca, through which roughly 40% of global trade passes every single year. It has oil. It has palm oil. It has semiconductors. It has a young, English-speaking workforce. It is, by every basic checklist, a country that should be thriving. And in many ways, it is. GDP per capita hovers around 13,000 US dollars. It's not poor. It's not broken. But it's also not where it should be, not after 60 years of independence, not with all of these natural advantages, and not in a world that is desperately searching for the next manufacturing hub as China gets too expensive. This isn't just a story about one Southeast Asian economy. This is a story about the hidden tax of cheap, how a country can subsidize its way into a trap, price itself out of its own future, and wake up one day to find that being affordable wasn't the advantage it thought it was. And right now, in 2025, Malaysia is standing at that exact crossroads. Let's start with the thing everyone loves about Malaysia: the price of everything. Fuel subsidies in Malaysia cost the government roughly 80 billion ringgit in recent years. That's nearly $17 billion US dollars. To give you a sense of scale, that's more than Malaysia spends on education, more than it spends on healthcare. It is essentially the government writing a check every single year, just so you can fill your tank for almost nothing. Now that sounds generous. And it is if you're driving a Proton Saga and earning a modest salary. But here's the problem. Subsidies don't care who you are. A billionaire driving a Mercedes pays the same artificially low fuel price as a school teacher on a bus. In fact, the World Bank estimated that the richest 20% of Malaysians captured the largest share of fuel subsidy benefits. The people who needed help the least were quietly getting the biggest handout. This is where the contradiction begins. The government was spending billions to keep prices low for the masses, but the masses weren't actually the main beneficiaries. And every ringgit spent propping up the fuel price was a ringgit not spent on building highways that don't flood, hospitals that don't run out of medicine, or schools that actually prepare kids for a digital economy. Cheap fuel was costing Malaysia its future, and almost nobody was talking about it. Now, let's talk about the ringgit, because this is where cheap starts to look genuinely dangerous. In 2024, the Malaysian ringgit hit its lowest point against the US dollar in 26 years.
26 years.
You had to go back to the tail end of the Asian financial crisis to find the ringgit this week. Think about what that means in practice. A Malaysian engineer earning 8,000 ringgit a month, a solid, middle-class salary, is earning the equivalent of roughly $1,700 US dollars. That same engineer's counterpart in Singapore, just across the causeway, might earn $5,000 or $6,000 US dollars doing an identical job. Everything imported becomes more expensive. Machinery, technology, medical equipment, the raw ingredients of modernization. And Malaysia, despite its natural resources, imports a lot of what it needs to grow. So you get this brutal irony. The country looks cheap to foreigners visiting with dollars or euros, but for Malaysians earning ringgit, life is quietly getting more expensive every single year, even when the price tags don't change. That's not affordability. That's a slow squeeze. But here's where things get really complicated. Malaysia loses roughly 500,000 of its citizens to emigration, and a disproportionate number of them are the most educated, the most skilled, and the most ambitious.
Doctors,
engineers, finance professionals, tech workers. And where do most of them go? Singapore, the same country that, 60 years ago, was expelled from the Malaysian Federation. The same tiny island with no natural resources, no oil, no palm oil, no rainforest. Singapore took the people Malaysia couldn't retain, paid them properly, built world-class institutions around them, and became one of the wealthiest nations per capita on the planet. That is not a coincidence. That is a policy outcome. Malaysia's response, for decades, has been a policy framework that prioritized ethnic preferences in education, government contracts, and corporate ownership over pure meritocracy. The Bumiputera policy was designed to uplift the Malay majority, and in some respects it did. But the unintended consequence was that a portion of Malaysia's most talented non-Malay citizens, largely Chinese and Indian Malaysians, looked at their ceiling and decided it was lower than their ambition. So they left. And when your most talented people leave, the productivity gap widens, the innovation deficit grows, and no amount of cheap fuel fills that hole. Now, and this is crucial, foreign direct investment. Malaysia has been aggressively courting foreign companies. And it's worked partially. Microsoft announced a $2.2 billion investment. Google is building data centers. Nvidia is engaged. There's a genuine tech buzz around Kuala Lumpur right now, and the government deserves credit for chasing it hard. But here's the uncomfortable question. Is Malaysia getting the investments it wants, or just the investments it can get? Because there's a difference between a country attracting semiconductor fabs that do cutting-edge R&D and a country attracting data centers that mostly need cheap land and stable electricity. One builds an ecosystem. The other builds server rooms. Vietnam is now competing fiercely for the same manufacturing dollars fleeing China. Indonesia, with 280 million people and an enormous domestic market, is offering scale that Malaysia simply cannot match. Thailand has deeper industrial roots. And Singapore, always Singapore, offers something Malaysia structurally cannot: complete legal certainty, zero corruption perception, and a currency that doesn't make CFOs nervous. Malaysia isn't losing the foreign investment race, but it might be winning the wrong laps. Let's bring this down to ground level. To the ordinary Malaysian. You are 28 years old. You graduated from a decent university. You landed a job in KL paying 4,500 ringgit a month. By regional standards, by any developing country standard, that sounds okay. Except rent for a modest apartment in Kuala Lumpur now runs between 1,800 and 2,500 ringgit a month. A car, which you essentially need because public transport outside the city center is still patchwork, costs you another 700 to 1,000 ringgit in monthly installments. Add utilities, food, phone, loan repayments if you went to a private university, and suddenly that 4,500 ringgit is essentially gone before the month ends. And the kicker? Malaysia's household debt as a percentage of GDP is one of the highest in Asia. Malaysians are borrowing to survive in a country that's supposed to be affordable. The cheap life that Malaysia advertises to the world is not quite the life that Malaysians are living. That gap between the perception of cheap and the reality of stretched is at the heart of this entire story.
Zoom out.
Way out. The world right now is in the middle of a massive supply chain reorganization. Post-COVID, post-Russia-Ukraine, post-US-China decoupling, every multinational corporation on Earth is asking the same question. Where do we put our next factory? Our next hub? Our next bet? Southeast Asia is the answer almost everyone is pointing to. And Malaysia should be perfectly positioned to capture this moment. It has the infrastructure. It has the English. It has the location. It has the history of semiconductor manufacturing going back to Intel setting up in Penang in 1972, over 50 years of chip industry DNA. This is Malaysia's window. Possibly its biggest window in a generation. But windows don't stay open forever. If Malaysia doesn't fix its ringgit credibility, if it doesn't resolve the talent retention problem, if it doesn't make the hard decision to reform subsidies in a way that actually reaches the poor instead of subsidizing everyone equally, then the window closes. And the capital, the talent, the momentum flows to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to India. Countries that were once further behind are now running faster. So here's where we land. There are two versions of Malaysia's next decade. In the first version, the current government, Madani Malaysia, under Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, threads the needle. Subsidy reform actually reaches the bottom 40%. The ringgit stabilizes as fiscal credibility improves. The talent drain slows because opportunities at home start matching opportunities abroad. The semiconductor cluster in Penang becomes a genuine global hub, not just an assembly outpost. Malaysia captures the China Plus One manufacturing wave and rides it into high-income status. It becomes the country it always had the ingredients to be. In the second version, the reforms stall. Populist pressure kills hard decisions before they stick. The ringgit stays weak, imported inflation grinds down the middle class, and the brain drain accelerates quietly. The FDI that arrives is low value add. Malaysia gets stuck, not poor enough to demand urgent action, not rich enough to feel secure. The economists have a name for it: the middle-income trap. Malaysia has been flirting with that trap for 20 years. The next 5 will decide which side of it the country lands on. And the world, investors, policymakers, the entire Southeast Asian neighborhood, is watching to see which Malaysia shows up. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. Is cheap a feature, or is it a symptom? Because for Malaysia, the answer to that question will determine whether this decade is remembered as the moment the country finally broke through, or the moment it let the greatest opportunity in a generation quietly slip away. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Malaysia makes it? Or does the trap win? If this made you think differently about how economies actually work beneath the surface, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people. And if you want more breakdowns like this, on the economies the mainstream media undersells and the stories hiding inside the numbers, subscribe. The next one is going to hit even harder.